that, we'll move forward to our last panel for the day. And this involves our moderator, Erin Reed. She's the CEO of Plastic Bank and an advisor at Querio. And we're going to bring up design thinking. For those of you that don't know, design thinking all starts with empathy. And she's going to talk about cultural problem solving as it relates to institutional capital. So with that, I'll invite Erin Rand up, and then she can introduce the panelists can come as well, and she'll introduce them. So I'll hand it over.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, you got it all? There you go.
Excellent. And we have Lorraine. Come on up, Lorraine. Hello, everyone. Oh, no, better than that. Hello, everyone.
Right on.
Much, much better. We are the last panel of the day, as they mentioned, and so that means we are between you and wine. So we're going to make sure you're not thinking about wine. We're going to make sure you're thinking about us, and they need a nice glass of wine when we're done. Excellent. So we are here with this amazing panel to talk about a subject that I am very passionate about, and that is the importance of bridging cultures in investment, both pre and post investment. We are in an ever-shrinking world, and cross-cultural investment is becoming more and more commonplace. And yet we often use our standard business tools. So if we stay focused on those tools and only using those tools, we are gambling on whether or not we're going to step on cultural landmines. In the last week alone, while I was preparing for this panel, I sat with a company, members of a company, a Canadian, very friendly, polite Canadian company, and an Australian potential investor who was very direct, very terse, very abrupt. And at one point in the conversation, the Canadian company had decided that the Australian investor wasn't really interested because they were, in their interpretation, mean. They clearly didn't like the company, when in fact the opposite was true. The fact that the Australian investor being so deep, so hard, meant that they were really excited about the company. But the messages were getting lost between the two, and it reinforced for me why this panel was so important. So I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists, our very powerful panel tonight, who are going to show us some tools that we can use and methodologies, and even some simple ways of thinking that will help us avoid some of these landmines. So first, I'd like to introduce Nathan Shedroff. Nathan is the Executive Director of Seed Vault, a Singapore-based platform building an independent, trusted bot economy on the blockchain. He is a design pioneer, I'd say design icon, turned entrepreneur, and an international educator, speaker, and consultant. And he's authored more than 10 books, most recently Blind Spot, Illuminating the Hidden Value of Business. I've read it. If you haven't, you should. It's fundamental on this topic.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great intro.
I'd also like to introduce Dr. Lorraine Justice. Thank you for being here, who moved her schedule around to talk on this topic and bring this to you guys. She is the author of the newly published book, The Future of Design, Global Product Innovation in a Complex World, also an excellent book. She is a TED presenter, a fellow of the Industrial Design Society, and a Dean Emerita of Rochester Institute of Technology. She owns the design research firm Justice Design and works with corporations and other entities to reduce financial risk through design thinking methods. And finally, we are fortunate to have Dr. Gino Yu, who I know many of you already know tonight. And Gino is currently an associate professor and director of digital entertainment and game development in the School of Design at PolyU in Hong Kong. He has hosted many events, including TEDx Hong Kong, Wikimania, Towards Science, a Consciousness, and Meaningful Media. Gino is a sought-after speaker on blockchain and other emerging technologies and serves as an advisor to several leading-edge endeavors. Welcome. So Nathan, I would like to start with you. We're going to refer to design thinking many times this evening as one of the tools that we can help use to be more successful in our investments. But maybe you can give us a brief overview of what we mean by design thinking in this context.
Sure, absolutely. Could we get our slides up, please? The first of our slides? Perfect. How many people here feel like they understand what design thinking means? Okay, a couple. That's great. How many people think that they could maybe describe it to their child or their mother? Okay, nobody. That's great. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll feel very different from that. We're going to give you a quick overview and primer of what design thinking is. Next slide, please. So most designers use design thinking, but not everyone who uses design thinking is a designer, because design thinking can be applied to many, many processes. Hopefully you can read that. Oh, perfect. Excellent. But the first thing to understand is that the word design gets confused for a lot of different things, and there is a class of design that is about crafts. These are professional skills that you go to school for, you practice as a profession, and that's not the same thing as design thinking. Design thinking is a process that many designers use, but just because you are a design thinker or you understand design thinking doesn't automatically, qualify you to start making design decisions in fashion design, automobile design, sound design, a million different sound design disciplines. So that's the first thing that you need to orient yourself to. There's about 4 major steps in design thinking, the first 2 being the most important. Design research, which uses specifically qualitative techniques, and then reframing. This is probably the most important thing that happens in the design thinking process, because reframing is when you get back this research and it tells you what you thought was going to be a good solution is no longer now a good solution, but you found a better solution. That reframe is what allows you to pivot, which has been a popular term these days, especially in entrepreneurship. So the reframing is the new understanding that comes from research that allows you, hopefully, encourages you to pivot. Oops, the other way around. There we go. This is how most people think, non-designers think of the design process. It's just this sort of messy, hidden process. This is also how a lot of designers think about it once they start, and the fear of will they be able to create something fantastic. But in reality, design thinking is a process that applies not just on the product level where we create great products and services, but applies just as importantly to the strategic level where we decide what we're going to do as a company, what products and services are we even going to make. The insights that come from design research and reframing are even more important at the front end of strategy than they are at the back end of how are we going to make this product or service fantastic. Design thinking is just one of many ways of solving problems and approaching challenges, but it's particularly good when the times are ambiguous, when your data doesn't look like anything that you've seen before, when your old models don't work, and when you need wholly new solutions than have existed before. That's the time to use design thinking. It's not the process to use when you want to automate your manufacturing quality assurance. It's not the process you use for developing, deep fundamental science, for instance. But when you have ambiguous times and when you need wholly new things, that's when design thinking is perfect. Design thinking takes many different skills along those processes, and one of the things that we need to understand is that the different cultures of how we work have a place in the process, but if the wrong culture is in charge of the wrong phase, it essentially can destroy the phase. So if you have a quantitative optimizer in charge of the idea generation process, you're not going to get a lot of good ideas. But if you have a conceptualizer in charge of the implementation project, you're probably never going to make it to market. All of these approaches and cultures are important, but they're important at a certain time. And design thinking helps us figure that out. Lastly, I just want to say that design thinking can be strategic. It can be about what your company's goals and mission is. It's not just about how to make a beautiful looking product in the end.
Thank you, Nathan. So that's a little bit about one of the major tools we're going to talk about tonight, but what about the problems that we're actually working on solving? How many in the audience can think of a time when there was a cross-cultural challenge? By a show of hands. Oh, just a few. Oh, that surprises me. Surprises me. Maybe we can stimulate some thinking. Lorraine, you want to give us some examples, and then I'll come to Gino, of times when you've seen cross-culture challenges create an interesting situation that might...
Yes, a lot of it started when I moved from the U.S. to Hong Kong and put the American dream in storage. I quickly learned that in the West, we tend to be very straightforward, don't have the patience, aren't as humble as we should be, and on and on. And I learned that I was sitting at the wrong end of the table. I learned that I needed to approach things differently. And the thing with design, though, when we're looking at problems, if you are investing in a company, you want to use design to mitigate risk. It's about doing that design process and design research up front to understand what the culture is, understand how do people live and work, and how could that impact the success of the company that you're thinking of investing in. And then the personalities of people involved. I have an Italian design friend who was working with an Asian company and became so frustrated and so angry. He didn't understand that you have to kind of build these relationships and wade through some of the meetings before you can get a direct response of any kind, even if then. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine, because that's a highlight, right? It doesn't matter what country. The examples that that Lorraine talked about, we had Italy and China, and she had US and China. My experience was Canada and Australia. Gino, do you have some others that you could share with us, some examples?
Well, lots. I also grew up in the US, and then my wife is from Hong Kong. And so us raising kids actually was different cultures. Before that, although this is part of the wrong part of the Bay Area to be saying this, but I did my bachelor's and PhD at Berkeley. Go Bears?
Yeah.
All right. And then normally, especially when you're in electrical engineering and computer science at Berkeley, you're just kind of straight and you're forward, and you would actually, Paul's there, you would just have heated conversations, which is, in Berkeley speak, is just normal talking. But if you're not familiar with Berkeley, it looks like you're having a big argument. And what that does is it kind of kicks the energy up, and it stimulates it. And it's almost like electron orbit. And so you have a certain amount of energy, and the other person has a certain amount of energy, and you look at things slightly differently. But when you come together, it kind of kicks both of you into a higher energy orbit that allows you to look at things from different perspectives. And part of that is, in order to have that happen, there has to be a tension. You have to care about something, or there should be something that's interesting that's driving you, that's kicking the energy up in terms of a stimulation. But if I'm very rigid in my approach, there's like a force that brings us together, and there's a force that pulls us apart. And if the force that pulls us apart is stronger than the force that brings us together, then the whole thing is going to dissipate, you're going to get alienation. And it's part of the dance and creative, and the reason why that squiggly line is so messy is you've got different people and different perspectives basically priming the pump to kick the energy up. And then someone, ideally the container or the process, holds the space. It's like the nuclear reactor that allows the explosion to take place in a controlled way so that you're not killing each other, those of you that are married, and you need that space. Usually it's like something common thing like the kids, or where should we move, or paying rent, or something like this, that brings you together, that brings you together, kicks the energy up with the different perspectives that allows for the exploration into coming up with a solution. Another thing about this too is when one of my first projects graduating from Berkeley, I taught at USC. USC? No, USC. Okay, and then one of my first big projects was I founded the multimedia program in the engineering school. We wrote a big NSF ERC grant there. We got about $8.8 million a year for 11 years. It was fairly competitive. And USC at the time had a top engineering school and probably the best film school in the world. And you have the business school, you have Annenberg Communication, you have all of these great top programs, but each of them look at reality, and the culture and the way they deal with people and the way they look at things was completely different. And so grabbing all of these different disparate elements and trying to bring them together into a cohesive, coherent program that everyone could agree on in terms of a proposal in a direction was also a challenge, which also goes through this kind of squiggly line, common objective, and then having the container for the clash and creating the crucible for innovation to happen.
Excellent. Thank you, Gino. I think that's a really good point. I introduced this topic as a challenge because I've seen personally a number of times cross-culture, it doesn't even have to be cross-country, it can be any kind of cross-culture, caused a problem that could have been avoided if we'd been paying attention to that beforehand. It can also be an asset. And part of this idea of using design thinking in this approach is to be thoughtful about it and not let it happen by accident. And Nathan, I wanted to ask you to see if an example, because a lot of us know the straightforward, stereotypical even, examples of cross-cultural. But maybe you could give us a more nuanced example?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most important things that design does is it illuminates the invisible. And most of the value that any investor, any entrepreneur is trying to create in their company is actually invisible. It does not show up on the balance sheet, does not show up on an income statement. It is invisible to the mechanisms that management in the company are using in order to manage the company and move it forward. So design is particularly adept at identifying those invisible things. Now, what is that invisible value? It's emotions, it's identity, that's where brand lives, and it's meaning. And so if you have tools that help you see those invisible things, then you can use the output of that to put that into the development process and actually develop that value. And the first thing those things tell you is they help you identify different cultural differences, and they help you identify meaning. So if you can figure out what your customer, what's most meaningful to your customer, and use that to deliver it, you can create and develop and deliver the best kind of value ever. And if you take that design tool and bring it into the relationship management, investor management, corporate management strategy side, if you can understand what's most motivating and most meaningful to the person on the other side of the table, or maybe next to you on the table that you're negotiating some sort of relationship with, then you can tailor your conversations to exactly what moves them the most. Because it's not always the things that we assume, like accomplishment or money. It's not even always duty or community. Sometimes it's wonder, sometimes it's beauty, sometimes it's harmony. And if you have a language and a tool to help you identify that, that gives you a tool to strengthen the relationships you create.
Thank you. Lorraine?
In design, we're evaluating and critiquing products, services, experiences every single day. I mean, that's what we do. We evaluate these new things, new innovations. Are they going to make it? Are they not going to make it? And we have a lot of criteria that we use that I think would be very beneficial for the financial community. It's more of a broad brush approach. We look at whether something is aesthetic, whether it's functional, whether it's sustainable, whether it's culturally appropriate, and on and on and on. We even, if you're in another country, we even look at what's going on with the government, what's going on with the geography and the climate, on and on. We have a broad brush approach of evaluating the success of a particular company. And these tools I think can be very valuable for the financial community.
Thanks, Lorraine. Gino, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, just the whole point of seeing the invisible, I think that was brought up. And if you think of like a company as a little village, part of designing a functional company, a cohesive company that where people can work together, and the crucible for that, especially in a high stress environment of tremendous growth, rapid growth, going from 100 people to 10,000 people in like 2 or 3 years, is how do you keep the values and how do you keep the organization functioning in that? And that requires the engineering of a culture. And the way that the culture, and if you think about it, a culture is a functional mythology. And a functional mythology serves 4 functions. There's the cosmological function of what is reality. There's the societal function of how do the different people coordinate, communicate, and how do things get done. There's the pedagogical function of how do you get people through the different stages of life or whatever. And then there's the mystical function of how do you get people to see the transcendent mystery source, to see this invisible stuff from which all things arise. And if you think about that, it's basically the ingredients and that's how religions are constructed. And it's constructed by the mythology, the art, and the rituals that provide a group of people a common semantic reference to communicate inner experiences, the unknown. If I say this is a chair, you know what I mean. But if I say, Lorraine, I love you, what the hell does that mean? How do we define, where are the semantics that we communicate these kind of things? And so it's working with companies and their senior management to look at, I'm going to say a woo-woo term here, a level of consciousness in terms of the worldview and the perspective and the development of the senior management, and working with them to engineer the mythology, the art, and the rituals that define the company. And if you can design that right, you're prepared, and you can really, and tune it, you can really prepare the organization for growth. And related to this, one thing, which is very important but undervalued, although Apple kind of is a company that started valuing, is that if you look at a village, using a village analogy, normally in a village you have the village leader who's get things right, make sure things move forward, and things happen efficiently and effectively. But most villages, whenever the village leader has something that they can't deal with or something they're not sure of, there's always a village shaman, that they would consult, and they would have other ways of processing and seeing things to come up with answers and solutions. And that there's a respect and there's a working closely together between the shaman and the village leader. In today's companies, the leader is the CEO, and the shaman is the head of innovation or head of design, right? And so if we look at strategy and all of this other stuff, all of this, for a functional organism to grow and thrive, requires this to be very well thought out and engineered, which is the crucible for innovation.
Right. Thank you, Gino. And I want to bring that back. I want to take that, because we struggled a little bit, if I'm honest, when we were pre-talking about the panel, because every time we wanted to talk about design and bridging, using that as a tool to bridge cultures, we would naturally navigate to where we're using design today. So we would start talking about companies that design products really well versus companies that didn't use design thinking in products. And there is more of a trend now to use design thinking in building cultures. I'm seeing that more and more, and building culture with intention. One of the things we want you to think about is how you use that same level of design thinking when you're approaching either investors, if you're an organization looking for funding, or if you are an investor looking at opportunities and stepping away. And part of the reason we want to use design thinking, and I'm going to put this to the panel again, is when we talk about other cultures, we have a danger of falling into stereotypes and thinking that we know. Oh, I know how Japanese people do business, or I know how South Americans do business, or Canadians are all the same. And so I want to put it out to you guys, when you're thinking about this very important relationship between an investor and their portfolio company. Someone might say it was like a marriage, I heard somebody say, and marriages, what did you say, marriages aren't easy?
Yeah.
How does design thinking differ from just following stereotypes?
I think there's a great opportunity for investors to use some of these tools, processes, and perspectives, quite frankly, because investors now know they need to do their technical due diligence, they know they need to do their financial due diligence, but most companies, most startups don't fail because of the finances or because of the technology. They fail either because the culture shakes them apart, or because they don't have a customer fit. They don't understand how to create value for their customers because they're really just making what they want to make for themselves, right? And these are exactly the two places where these design tools can play a really important role in an investor evaluating whether a company, is prepared to be successful in the way they think they can, or if they need alternative resources in order to help them be successful because maybe they don't have some of these skills or orientations or understandings on board at the moment that they're talking to them. And you talk about risk mitigation here too, which I think is really important.
Right. The research that we do in design, it's not really marketing research, but it's really getting to know anything, the culture of the company, who the consumers are, what might they be interested in, what don't they want. I'll give you a concrete example though. When we do design research, or I should say when we do our traditional marketing research, we can't just transfer that to other countries. A specific example is when I had a software company, a major software company, want to introduce a software package in Asia. And so they wanted to run focus groups. And I kept thinking, oh, this isn't going to work. And so the focus groups didn't work because the people in the focus groups were too shy to talk in front of each other, so they didn't get any information. Then we separated the men from the women to try to get more information, and that wasn't much better. And finally, we had to improvise for that culture, and I called it Bring a Friend. We had one person and a friend come and then discuss the service and product and whatever, and got more information. But our traditional Western research methods do not work across the world.
That's a much better technique anyway. Yeah.
So I want to tie that back to investment and the relationship between the investor and the target company pre-investment and the portfolio company investment. How would you encourage the audience to apply these type of concepts in that setting? Whoever would like to answer.
Well, first of all, the risk involved in putting a new product or service out without really understanding the culture is huge. But it's not just about losing money or losing your investment. It's about lawsuits. It's about all the other types of legal issues that come up. And so the design process and design thinking can help uncover some of these pitfalls. So when you're investing, whether you're just looking at something to invest in, there's a broader brush approach that you should be taking. But even while you have an investment going on with a company, you have to stay on it. And we've got examples of companies in South America who were getting thrown out because they didn't understand the local culture, but if they would have read the local newspapers, they would have understood.
Yeah, I haven't.
Thank you,
I've asked around. I haven't found a single venture capital firm of any size that employs someone on staff or has someone on call to do a cultural assessment of their investees, either pre or post investing in them, or to do a design, this sort of larger concept design assessment. And I think that's a wasted opportunity, because to have someone available to come in and say, yeah, they don't know their customers like they think they do, and they need to do this, this, and this, or else they're not going to be successful, to me would be invaluable before you invest in someone. And to have someone come in and say, yeah, they have a very 50s or 60s approach to market research because they're just going, they're doing easy demographic separation rather than segmenting their audience based on something more valuable like emotions or meaning or identity. You would want to know that going in before you invest in them.
What about sorry, Gino, please go ahead, because I'm going to shift gears a bit. So if you want to answer this one.
Well, for me, one of the big things that we've been looking at to try to look at this, because globally, cultures are completely different, and then even within a country, they're different, and then even within different generations have different cultures, and hell, Republicans, Democrats, et cetera, which leads to fragmentation and everything. And so what we've been really looking at, too, to get to the core, so I've been in digital entertainment for about 30 years, but the last 15 years, I do research in consciousness, in phenomenology and neurophysiology, and understanding kind of development, and looking at reframing entrepreneurship and organizational culture, and even the perspective of the investor from the perspective of personal development. And so realizing that we're all kind of, every one of us is going through these different stages of life, and you have to, we're all going to meet our maker, and the entrepreneur process is a certain process of a stage of life that the brave, the ones that are the adventurers, go through, and that's what pushes humanity forward, if you think about that. And so if we think about funding these people that have the new ideas, that are trying to develop towards something, and the ones that have done well and are financially successful, but maybe facing, I hate to say this in this way, but maybe they're closer to the end of life than the others, is really looking at legacy and what am I really about, and what do I want to, what's my life really about? We had a dinner yesterday where we were looking at that, and then really looking at things from the perspective of personal development and the different stages of life, and providing tools for them to really explore that, as a soul-searching thing as I'm coming near the end, or what is it, what's our vision for the future, and then bringing that together, and then that whole ecosystem is an engine for innovation for society and humanity.
Thank you. So we're running out of time. So I want to wrap it up. And one of the things I really wanted to leave this group with was not just the idea that this is important. And I hope you guys did get that. I think we talked a lot about why design is important and some of the ways it can go wrong if you don't. Like if you don't take that design thinking. What I'd invite the panel to do is give this audience some concrete, specific tools or ways to access tools, because I think in my experience when I talk to people about this, it feels fluffy and it feels soft, and people don't know how to get, okay, I understand it's good, but what are the things that I can actually do?
Sure. I'll jump in because I've made it really easy. I've restructured my entire website all around these tools, so you'll find probably a collection of 25 leadership tools, strategic tools, and systemic tools if you go to nathan.com.
I'll make it simple as well. My book, the new book that's out, has 10 global impact factors, and they list the things that you should be looking at when you're considering investing in a global company. And if I could just say one more thing, if you could make the distinction between a fine artist and a designer, that would really help the rest of the world. Fine art is about self-expression and communicating an idea. Designers work to make people's lives and experiences as good as they can be.
For me, I guess I would say the container now, a lot of people are exploring gamification as ways of kind of taking the edge off. There are new tools for decision making. Alan Bernard's here as well too. They've got an amazing tool for helping people go through uncertainty, and they've systematized it in a gamified kind of way. And then related to the cross-cultural relationship, although different people have different backgrounds and different cultures, the underlying physiological mechanisms are similar. And one simple takeaway is more eye contact. And so if you maintain eye contact when you speak, when we do research in this, there are actually parts of your brain that become coupled, and when you speak to someone maintaining eye contact, it feels a certain way, versus, if I talk to you like this right now, this feels different. And so really looking at connecting with the people, whether they're your investor, your employees, your customers, or throughout, just explore the relationship between eye contact and communication.
Excellent, thank you. And the one that I would like to leave you with is, if you have access to design tools, I think we covered it high level today, and you think about how much success there's been in design thinking, in changing the way some companies are successful with launching products, some companies are successful with building cultures. If I could encourage you to reach out and take advantage of some of those tools, I think investment, using those tools, it's very transferable to being able to talk to your portfolio companies as well as assess those portfolio companies and what help they need going forward. Thank you.
This was. I just want to iterate, before you guys get off stage, we're actually going to probe your minds a little bit, because how often is it that you get some phenomenal speakers on a panel talking about design thinking, which is about changing your mindset and understanding others? So it's the end of the day, I know, but I found that very illuminating in that there was one phrase somebody said, which was design thinking illuminates the invisible. And I thought that was genius. Not that you're not all genius, but I want to open it up to Q&A for the audience, for the panelists. And so with that, does anybody, we have a mic runner, and from there, I would say, does anybody have any questions for the panel? A brave soul, I appreciate that.
Investors come to a startup oftentimes early on. They may have a product idea, they may be experimenting with a pivot, so they're basically in that swirl area. So what could an investor try to deduce about the company in terms of how the team is dealing with that at that stage?
It doesn't sound like it's on here. Take this one, Lorraine.
Well, at that point, they're in the creative soup. They're looking at what's going to come out of that creative soup, but they need to evaluate it. They need to go back to what was the original opportunity, what was the original intent, and see if that is really what's going to play out. And you may need to spend more time investigating some of these other areas that we're talking about the culture, rather than just the numbers and so on. The other word of caution is a lot of companies that build around a product that they believed in, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate to their potential consumers or users.
I would just add that if they can't show you evidence from research of what moves their customers on an emotional level or an identity level or a meaningful level, they haven't engaged their customers and they really don't know anything about them. If all their research has been quantitative or is focused on price points and features, they're just not in a position to actually know what they're doing.
For me, looking at it from the perspective of personal development, A large part of it is different values in terms of objective outcomes, whether I'm trying to get an exit so that I can do the next investment or whatever, versus the product and everything. And there are a lot of emotions that are involved. And it's taken literally. You know, he screwed me over, I'm never going to work with him, et cetera. And so you look at things literally, versus if you look at it from the perspective of personal development, you can look at things mythically. And so I don't know if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And so an entrepreneur's path is a hero's journey path. And so you're usually the person that you're pitching to, usually the way it works is there's a call to action, a refusal to call, then a threshold guardian, there's the road to trials, apotheosis, return journey, return threshold guardian, and then master of two worlds. So that's kind of the hero's journey. Nearly all films go through that process. And if you look at your life, everything that you've done from getting married to starting a company, you can actually kind of map through those milestones as well too. And part of it is to entrain the entrepreneur to look at things more mythically rather than literally. Where am I? Is this the start of a new hero's journey cycle? Okay, the investor that I'm pitching to is basically the threshold guardian. And once I get funded, I'm in the unknown. I'm on the roads to trial. And I'm going to go through apotheosis. We're building this. And so rather than looking at it literally, can I look at things mythically? And with that, that kind of takes a lot of the emotional edge off, and it makes them realize the game of life that they are indeed playing. Now, for the investor's perspective, one is, hey, numbers, ROI, et cetera, but things are kind of getting swirly right now, right? You have triple bottom line, you have impact investment, so cap, all of this stuff that's kind of, well, how do I judge all of this? And that's a very personal decision for the investor. What are you really trying to do? And usually, most of these people on the investment decision-making side are post-40, post-45 or so, which means, from a life cycle, they're kind of on the downward spiral side. And then you should start thinking about, given the state of the world today, what is this really about? And what are we really trying to do? And how am I working towards making this a better place? And then really doing that soul searching to know, why are you doing this?
I'm going to summarize that just a bit, and because I think you and I feel very similar about this. So one of the things that I would do at that stage is the questioning. Where is that entrepreneur team? The questions you ask them to understand why they're there and what they're doing and what they're motivated by and what their reason for being is, some of the things Nathan referred to earlier as well, and helping them understand, being honest about where you and your team, what motivates you, why you're excited about them, and coming up with that language in between that you guys can have as an ongoing stage where you both understand what the measure of success is for each of you.
Great. Another question, if the panel's okay with it?
Yeah.
So I would love you guys to talk a little bit about the dark side of design thinking. Because as you were talking, I thought to myself, wow, well, there's an assumption here that we're using this for good, but it also seemed like, it could be used for manipulation and control and domination and all of that.
Yes, I'm still a professor at RIT, and we have to tell our game developers, do you realize you're doing something that is addictive or could be addictive? And then how do you feel about that? It's like you have to bring that awareness. And so they understand that what they're doing might be addictive, and that may impact how they do their game from then on. So there are a lot of ethical issues around this, or our website developers who, they try to trick people into getting their data. And we have to tell them, look, this is a great design idea, but, it's a little unethical. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, when I speak to students in Europe about meaning systems and researching core meanings and then how to use them strategically in products and services, I often get someone that stands up and says, stop, this is bad, don't do this, because they interpret that often as propaganda. If you know someone really well and you can target the deepest connections that they make with people or products or service or brands or whatever, that could very well, if you're not careful with those solutions, be manipulation. I think they're the most manipulative people in the world just do that inherently. They have a knack for it. But I look at this as, these are just tools, or like any other tools. You can use a hammer to make something truly awful, and you can make a hammer to use something truly wonderful, and it's up to you and your values and your investees' values to use them wisely, but by all means, you can use them in a nefarious way. The last thing I will say is, I know I'm going to piss off some people in this room, but gamification is the dark arts, right? If you're using gamification, that's operant conditioning. That's what we teach, we get rats to do this to stimulate their brains and overstimulate themselves. So that's a big signifier of dark arts.
So I think 2 years ago I was on, especially given where society is and technology is today, I was at I was at the Rockefeller Center in Bellagio, looking at ethics in the realm of exponential technologies. And so as things are changing, and this is, Oppenheimer kind of comes to mind. And I think one of the conclusions that came out of that is the thing that you create actually relates to level of consciousness. If you think about it as people, for you guys, you probably know that the decisions you made probably 10 years ago are very different from the decisions you make today, which are probably going to be very different from the decisions you make 10 years from now. And so as you live your life, your worldview continues to change. And generally speaking, what you create relates to how much you've thought through and how much you've kind of gone through kind of this life process. Now, the problem with this thing is that from an exponential technologies perspective, everything is about making more things faster, more efficient, et cetera, which is kind of technologies for efficiency. Robotics, all those drones, hey, we don't need people to do anything anymore, and what's the future of work, et cetera. One of the things, an exciting area, and there's a conference on this and for you that are in the investing space, for the big civilization humanity perspective, are transformational technologies. Now with interactive media, with real-time biometrics, and e.g., real-time biometrics, interactive media, and big data, I can actually help people become more aware of how they're feeling, their emotional state, and what's going on within their bodies, and like meditation and all of these other processes to help people from an Eastern perspective go into a more inner knowing. And the premise is that if we can develop technologies for that, that will help us in terms of the technologies that we create in the future and the society that we create in the future. If the advancement of efficiency is greater than this empathy thing, we're kind of screwed globally, right? And so if we use these new technologies now to facilitate greater inner self knowledge in terms of integration with the physiology, emotions. Yeah, but also it relates to the dark side, because the dark side comes when efficiency trumps empathy.
Yeah, I like it.
I will just say one last thing.
Technology can help
towards this is that we often practice the dark arts with design thinking inadvertently. And the quickest way to hurt people is to hire people who think like you do, look like you do, act like you do, feel like you do, and don't reflect the diversity of humanity out there. Because most of what we see coming out of Silicon Valley now that is hurting things is because there's a lack of diversity in the design and development process that inadvertently does all these things, not intentionally. And that's just as bad.
Cool. All right. We got last one, Alan.
As Gino said, I've got a research lab. We focus on creative problem solving and decision making. And one of the things that has been really interesting is to realize that in most cases, we're not dealing with a problem solving problem. So the cause of a problem is that somebody's unaware or ignorant of the cause or the consequence or the solution. We're really dealing mostly with decision-making problems. Is that somebody is stuck with inertia, that causes them to resist making a good change, or that they have ineptitude that causes them to overreact and make bad changes. And these are uniquely human problems. So to me, it would be interesting to find out what the comments are about. We've tried to develop systematic ways of helping people make better, faster decisions when it really matters, identifying what those exaggerated fears and frustrations are, expectations that can cause people to over and underreact. So maybe just a comment from the panel about, it appears from what I've heard today that there's not many technologies that are looking at that problem. It's the problem of human decision making. You can have so much AI, but ultimately it comes to a person making a decision, and we have to understand what's blocking them from making good changes or what's causing them to overreact and what's making bad changes, and how we can use technology to learn that.
Yeah. Who'd like to take that one?
All the best problems are human problems. When it comes down to it, whatever, even in the tech industry or health, whatever industry you're in, they're all human problems, and they're not going to be solved by technology. Technology can help facilitate the solution, but I'll give you a quick example. STEM is exactly the wrong direction to go, because the one thing that computers are awesome at and way better than humans are at is math. So STEM is all about math. It's in every one of those acronyms, right? Every one of those characters. What we should be teaching are creative thinking skills, critical thinking skills, communication, collaboration skills, sustainability and systems thinking, and strategic skills. Those are all human skills. And we're only going to build a better world by paying attention to the problems that are uniquely human and solving them in human ways. And technology is going to be great at helping us do that. But too often in our industry, we mistake technology as the focus rather than sort of the enabling tool.
The thing I'd add to that is bias in our reasoning. Very often, and everyone has bias. It's just we have to recognize it and put it into context and then ask, is that bias okay or inert or whatever? But that's a big part of the process. And so I'm looking at research around design reasoning and bias, because that affects everything that happens in that whole channel.
All I have to say is related to the stuff is related to the emotional thing and why people make decisions is just listen to your body. And I have to pee, so.
And on that bombshell, I'm going to put a big hand of applause together for our panel. That's a really great way to end the day.